All right. Good morning, all. So I'll be presenting a paper titled Unpracticed Peace Through Geopolitics. My co-author, Professor Sandra Fernandes, unfortunately couldn't be here, so I'll be delivering the presentation on her part as well. So this is a brief overview of my presentation, but due to time constraints, maybe I'll just move along. So at the heart of this paper is the idea that geopolitics is just something essential for understanding societal development, which depends on security. And a core argument will be that individuals and not states should be at the heart of international politics, where interests and identities are transformed. I will elaborate on that as we go on. So geopolitics can function both as a means to practice peace and to unpractice peace. And that depends on how the security dilemma is utilized as an analytical approach to the effect. So we have two key geopolitical outlooks. We have the fatalist view, whereby humans are trapped in cycles of suffering driven by the security dilemma. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the transcendentalist view, whereby global society can rise above the dangers of the past. So, well, the security dilemma is a central concept across the major IR paradigms. It's based on the anarchic, a view of the international system as anarchic. So states rely on self-help. They have fear of attack, so that fuels power accumulation, and then as a result, such steps can create insecurity in another state, which then takes steps that can increase the fear of attack even further in the first state. So this is an important point. Security dilemma can trigger a spiral of escalating hostility, but that does not mean that all spirals constitute genuine security dilemmas. For instance, the case of colonial powers' expansionist ambitions. And there are two key aspects of the security dilemma. One of them is the idea that the uncertainty is just an issue that cannot be resolved because we cannot know the motives of the other party. And that, of course, generates fear, and taking steps to address that fear, that uncertainty, that could ultimately lead to self-destruction if intentions are misinterpreted. But the security dilemma can be a useful tool for decision makers, as long as, and this is called the security dilemma sensibility, as long as one recognizes fear in others' behavior, recognizes how one's own actions provoke fear. And while this is not always sustainable, sensibility can succeed if actors make an effort, they take risks, if they strive for cooperation. So the security dilemma is a direct consequence of the realist view of the anarchic international system, which leads states to prioritize their security. This is evident currently in the dynamics of great power rivalries, such as the tensions between the US, China, and Russia, where geopolitical interests and military capabilities heightens the sense of insecurity among states. There's some research trend that I want to address. So obviously there is a realist dominance in international relations. However, that has progressively started to change, at least to a certain extent. While security studies are privileged over peace studies, an important thing to retain is that there's also an emphasis on negative peace, meaning the absence of violence, over positive peace, which entails human realization. This has been studied by Galtung, who strived to expand the concept of peace. He saw it as the negation of all forms of violence, not just direct violence, but also structural violence. He saw inequality as a core structural form of violence, and he emphasized that peace requires social justice. So not just the absence of direct violence, but also the absence of structural violence. Well, during the Cold War, peace research continued to focus on negative peace, but some scholarship was produced that focused on the concept of interdependence, which influenced IR thinking on forced and state behavior, and basically how states could look differently at the use of force and how it could be used to achieve political means due to increased interdependence among states. So we have here a spectrum between federalism and transcendence. In this case, I'm talking about mitigation politics, that policies, that fall somewhere in the middle. Essentially, they're based on rational egoism. So often, I mean, we can think, for instance, about trade agreements. They can shape how states think about the use of violence, but you know, sometimes you're celebrated by political leaders who get replaced, and because you're based on self interest, everything can fall apart very quickly. There's no embedded trust between states. Yeah, with the end of the Cold War, there was a rise of studies in critical social sciences, social science, and there was a number of studies that denoted greater optimism about the possibility of transcending the security dilemma. So we have basically two approaches to transcendentalism. The first one is living with uncertainty. So the constructivist argument emphasizes that state action is influenced by interests and identities formed through interaction of geography and ideas. Cooperation and peace becomes possible when states see themselves and others differently within specific spaces. And Adler and Barnett built on that logic. They advanced the concept of security communities. For instance, Western Europe, where shared values, institutions, identity, etc., basically allowed fear and weapons to be replaced by cooperation and trust. So basically, divisions and suspicions are not necessarily inevitable. This fits, of course, transcendentalist logic. However, embedded trust cannot be built solely between leaders, political leaders, even though they play an important role. It has to happen also at intersocietal level. Because identities are socially constructed, it's possible that they can involve your enemy to trust. And as mutual positive feelings are built between societies, war and violence becomes unthinkable as an instrument of policy. So the peaceful uncertainty path basically entails norms, institutions, interdependence, multi-level societal interactions, and a point that I'd like to make that this still means living with uncertainty. So basically, on the one hand, we're still talking about peace as just the absence of war. And secondly, the existential condition of unresolvable uncertainty, it still remains in place. What happens is that if one ceases to be afraid of fear itself, then it's possible to transcend the trap of the security dilemma, even if one cannot escape it. And that's how we arrive at the second transcendentalist perspective. So space can be manipulated in the name of peace. It can be shaped and reshaped through decisions, through narratives that can either support positive peace or reinforce existing inequalities. And critical geopolitics challenge classical views of space. They basically, critical theorists argue that peace should be seen as contextual and embedded in power relations. They question what kind of peace are we talking about? How is it realized? And stressed that peace means different things at different scales to different groups, different times and places. So critical scholars also denounce the preference for stasis over change, meaning that they criticize how sometimes order was considered preferable to social injustice if it means that one could seize direct violence. Critical scholars, on the other hand, argue that short or medium-term peace, often victory imposed, was unfair. It risked new conflicts, and one needed to really address the issue of structural violence. They criticize liberal peace. They argue that it's basically just served the neoliberal empire and reflected Western privileges. So effective peace building ought to reflect local understandings of peace and justice, to not reproduce patterns of domination and colonial legacies, which are rooted in structures of the international system that sustain structural violence. So they advocated for a broader vision of peace, one that transforms social structures to promote nonviolence and justice rather than simply ending conflict or imposing order to delay it. They aimed at structural transformation. So the end of the state system, of capitalism, of the patriarchy, of white supremacy, governments, etc. Basically, each IR scholar would focus on one issue or two. And the security dilemma was actually seen as a byproduct of the international structures, and it was very rarely the focus of critical scholarship. Because from their perspective, as long as the structure was transformed, then the conditions that generated fear, uncertainty, inequality would be eliminated. And by replacing structural violence with trust, which would be made possible by structural transformation, it would be possible to build lasting positive peace. So very briefly, because I don't know if I have a lot more time, but this is basically a graphical abstract. We can see on the one hand fatalism and the idea that space is a battleground for power competition, and on the other hand we have transcendentalism. On one hand, one could build trust through cooperation, accept that uncertainty is unavoidable, and look at institutions and norms as a way to reduce arms races and conflicts. Basically, the geopolitical space could be seen as a domain for collaborative interaction. On the other hand, one could seek peace and justice through emancipation and look to build universal positive peace. This is based on the view that space is embedded in power relations, so it is through structural transformation that one can resolve the security dilemma and make peace and justice sustainable. So just a few more ideas. Cooperation based solely on rational egoism is probably, it is unsustainable. We're talking about ways in which the security dilemma is just mitigated, not transcended. Identities and interests can evolve beyond anarchy-driven conflict. That's a core argument that we're trying to make. Interdependence can prevent conflict, but ultimately it is a true embedded trust that requires deeper societal engagement, in which leaders can incentivize that one can transcend the security dilemma. And while security communities can remove conflict as an option, we still need to take into account that security communities can still perpetuate direct or structural violence either internally or globally, which is the case because the deep structure of international politics are not yet transformed. So critical geopolitics asked how, what, where, how, and for whom peace is practiced. They stressed that peace and justice are inseparable, that social justice shouldn't be tolerated just to maintain order, and that power dynamics shape peace practices. So adjustment is needed so that peace can serve local needs. So yeah, I guess I can just I just really wanted to mention that there's a spectrum, right? So we can go from inevitable fatalism to mitigation, then transcendence, and then eventually form a transcendence that escapes it. And yeah, just to finish, humanity could have done better in the past and may do better in the future. The security dilemma is a useful tool to understand said behavior. Kill or be killed persists as an option for the powerful, but that is not to say that cooperation cannot be possible when actors trapped in fear choose to pursue and build upon it. So thank you.